Good afternoon, everybody, and I really thank you all for coming here today and spending a bit of time with me to listen to me talk about the National Energy Board and the work that we do. Over the past week, we've been traveling throughout Atlantic Canada, meeting people and groups that are interested in the facilities that we regulate as the National Energy Board, and we regulate interprovincial and international pipelines, and we also regulate international power lines. And one of the things that I've really been struck by is just the well, firstly, the warmth that we've witnessed from everybody that we've met with, including the hospitality here today by the Harris Centre. Also, the interest in energy issues, and in New Brunswick, for example, a lot of that interest revolves around a pending application that's in front of us, the Energy East pipeline, which will be one of the biggest reviews of a pipeline project in our history. And of course, a lot of interest over the route and the nature for impacts on New Brunswick. I've also been struck by the weather. So we flew into Halifax last Sunday. And since then, we've been, blizzards seem to be following us around. We've been hit by two blizzards. One's in Halifax, another one in St. John, New Brunswick on Friday. And we made it here to your lovely city and province. So we were unfortunately unable to make it here on Saturday. We were looking forward to spending the weekend here. But with the blizzard and flight delays and everything like that, we never got here until mid-Sunday afternoon, unfortunately. And I'm planning on going to Charlottetown still, and I'm hearing now that storms are coming again, and the breakfast event that we had planned for the Chamber of Commerce in Charlottetown has already been canceled. So it looks like your hospitality, despite it being great, the weather is continuing to test us, our leg in Atlantic Canada. I had the pleasure last night of having dinner with the president of the university, Dr. Gary Kachanowski, and we talked about a lot of things, including the role of the university, not only in the city, but for the province. And I think the university, in a lot of ways, is to be congratulated with some of the things that they do and how they do it in your community, and in particular, the nature of the role of the Harris Centre, which I thought was very interesting and unique in its role in facilitating public engagement on issues across the city and across the province, and a different kind of role for an institution like a university, at least what I'm used to in my province. I've been looking forward to my visit to St. John's for quite some time. I actually have a family connection. My mother was born and raised in St. John's, and although I was born and raised in Alberta, and I haven't had much opportunity to get back here. That's part of the reason I look forward to coming here. But not only that, we've had the opportunity to meet with some other key people in your community. This morning we met with Scott Tessier, Chair and CEO of the Canada Newfoundland Offshore Petroleum Board, and the rest of his team. And I'll talk about that a little bit more later in my speech. And this afternoon, we're really looking forward to touring the university's Offshore Safety and Survival Center. And one of the deep connections that we have with the offshore boards is how we work together as regulators across the country on safety and safety culture for the oil and gas industry. And as some of you may know, I've been taking lots of opportunity over the last few months. I've only been with the National Energy Board for 6 months now, but I've certainly been out in various parts of the country speaking about pipeline safety right across Canada, and I want to speak about that today, even though the NEB doesn't regulate any pipelines in Newfoundland and Labrador. And the reason I want to do that is because the issues surrounding the projects that we regulate, surrounding the pipeline projects such as the Energy East application, the Northern Gateway pipeline, Keystone XL, the Trans Mountain expansion from Alberta to B.Sc. The discussions around these projects have become some of the defining public issues in our day in Canada today. And a lot of the dialogue and debate around energy issues have become centered around pipelines. Since Newfoundland and Labrador is an energy province and contributes significantly to Canada's energy industry, it's important, I felt, that the NEB engages Newfoundland and Labrador, and we had an opportunity to come and talk to people here in your community, as I said, notwithstanding that we don't regulate any pipelines in your province, or we don't regulate any infrastructure in your province. We felt it was important that we engage you on some of the energy issues that we all face as Canadians, and give you a bit of a context of what we face as the National Energy Board in our regulatory role in other parts of the country. So that's in essence what I want to do over the next few minutes, is talk about what I've characterized as being in the eye of the storm, pipelines and the National Energy Board. And as I mentioned, the NEB does find itself in some unfamiliar territory these days. And that territory includes being on the front page of newspapers across the country. And that's different than what we've experienced in the past. It's different in terms of some of the expectations that some members of the public and some stakeholder organizations place on us, and they're quite wide-ranging. So they were actually listed in the advertisement for this seminar, but some of the expectations and demands that we're facing are to lead the climate change debate, to increase market access for Canada's energy, to allow more people to participate in public regulatory processes than ever before, to cut red tape, to go faster in our reviews than ever before, to go slower in our reviews than ever before, to ensure that pipelines never fail and communities and landowners are protected, and really to try to answer all the voices in that debate and remain neutral as an independent regulator throughout it all. And as you can imagine, it's a unique place for the National Energy Board because, as Mike mentioned 5 years ago, for many, many decades, the National Energy Board, as Canada's national energy regulator, had a very, very low public profile. I think it would be fair to say that we quietly went about our business. We quietly reviewed applications for the projects that we regulate, and the public and the media paid little attention. But that's all changed. And that's not only changed relative to our roles, but just around the discussion on energy issues generally, not only in this country, but globally, I think. To give you a few statistics to give you a sense of the change from our vantage point, in 2008, we tracked only a total of 80 calls or inquiries from the media in the entire year. Last year, we had more than 600 in the year. In 2006, for a project that was proposed by Kinder Morgan for a small looping of their Trans Mountain pipeline for a portion of that route between Edmonton and the Lower Mainland. In 2006, that project had only 8 interveners. Now for the Trans Mountain expansion proposal that's in front of us today, we have 400 active interveners at the hearing and many, many more that are participating in the process. But 400 active means 400 that are following every piece of evidence, asking questions, filing motions with the board, and so on. So for a lot of people, what's changing? For some, the game changer can be traced to the 2010 BP Horizon blowout in the Gulf of Mexico. I think that was a defining issue in a lot of ways. For others, particularly as they look at pipeline projects, it was the Enbridge pipeline rupture in Kalamazoo, Michigan, also later that same year in 2010. To give you some more numbers, when our Northern Gateway Joint Review Panel completed its work in 2013, we had received feedback from more than 1,500 participants, and we'd received close to 10,000 letters of comment on that project. As we step into the beginning of the review of the Energy East project, we estimate that we might have as many as 5,000 people or more participating in that process. We do expect that we could be dealing with somewhere in the order of about 1,000 active interveners in that project. The review will likely be one of the biggest that we've ever done in our history. It's going to examine the longest proposed routing the board has ever reviewed. And so you can imagine, not only with the change in the context of the debate around the issues, but also with that increasing expectation on us and our process, it's a challenging place these days to try to figure out how we manage all those demands and expectations. The energy debate in Canada today is complicated, and it does provoke strong and sometimes polarized opinions. And as I said, the NEB now finds itself as a central figure in some of the stories that are out there in the public's minds. And that wasn't always the case. And I think it is somewhat unique that a regulator is also being thrust into the middle of some of these stories. So as I came onto the National Energy Board and thought about this and discussed this with our members about how we came to be in the context that we find ourselves in, we set about some new actions and some new directions as an organization. And I'm going to speak about them today. And I'm going to examine three fundamental questions, or pose three questions and then answer them for you. The first question is, what is the NEB? What is its mandate? And I'll just briefly go over that. The second question is, who is the NEB? Who are the faces behind the institution? And more importantly, what is their character? And thirdly, again, why do we find ourselves in the eye of the storm, and what are we doing about it? And I'm going to conclude by discussing a little bit around pipeline safety and some of the work that we're doing with your offshore board. First, maybe just Mike has already mentioned a little bit about me, and as was noted, I was born and raised in Alberta, graduated from the University of Alberta as a civil engineer. I spent 31 years in the Alberta Public Service, much of that time, about 25 years in the Environment Department, eventually becoming Deputy Minister of Environment. I moved on to become Deputy Minister of Energy, and then had the pleasure to become the head of the Alberta Public Service. But the one thing that I've found in my career to date, and almost all of my career has been spent on resource management issues, is that some of the rhetoric today about energy and resource development versus the environment, I've always felt, and I've always experienced, that it too often becomes polarized and framed as either right or wrong, with winners and losers in the story. And just frankly, in my experience, it isn't that simple. I've always found that it's not an either-or discussion, but rather a both-and discussion. I've found in my time working on resource management issues that there is ways to bridge issues, to bridge relationships, to achieve consensus on things. And that perhaps is one of the reasons that I'm very much enjoying my time at the National Energy Board, because in a way, we are one of those few institutions in this country that does have to work towards balancing the disparate views as it relates to a specific project. Every project we review has to be examined on a number of criteria, including the environmental, the economic, and the social aspects of the proposal. And then the panel or the board, as the case may be, has to put their minds to whether the project is in the public interest. In essence, whether we're better off with the project than without it, after we've weighed all the benefits and the burdens associated with the project. So a little bit more about the National Energy Board. We were created in 1959. I mentioned that we regulate international power lines and interprovincial and international pipelines. We're accountable to Canadians through Parliament. We function at arm's length from government. And so when you say all that, again, it doesn't really sound like a place where you'd expect to be in the middle of conflict and, quote, in the eye of the storm. But again, today, just the nature of the issues and the debates around energy in this province, they seem to be focused now on that piece of infrastructure, the pipeline. We regulate more than 73,000 kilometers of pipe in this country and about 1,400 kilometers of international power lines. And the value of the product that's transmitted by that infrastructure is quite significant, notwithstanding that we're seeing an adjustment in markets today and price of oil dropping. But suffice to say that the value of oil and gas products that are being transported in the infrastructure we regulate is in the order of $100 billion or more every year. The value of the electricity that's transmitted internationally through projects that we regulate is in the order of about $3 billion worth of electricity in and out of Canada annually. So who is the NEB? Who are the people that work in the eye of the storm, and what is their character? I go out of my way to tell people that the National Energy Board has a large technical resource of about 450 people. Our staff includes engineers, inspectors, public engagement staff, environmental specialists, economists, lawyers, amongst many others. So we've got a large and very competent staff resource that supports the board. We have 13 permanent and part-time board members that are appointed by the federal government. Many of those members hail from right across the country. Two of our members are from Atlantic Canada, Jamie Ballum from Prince Edward Island and Alison Scott from Nova Scotia. We have members that live and work in Calgary. We have members that live and work from Vancouver Island. We have a member in Montreal. We have a member in Toronto, in addition to our two members in Atlantic Canada. So what is the character of the staff and the board at the NEB? First thing, and back to this notion where we operated, kind of quietly and behind the curtain perhaps in the past. And as we're becoming more at the forefront, I think it's really important that people understand who we are and how we do things. So our people really, really care. Our people feel personally responsible for helping to ensure the safety of energy infrastructure, whether it's going through communities, whether it's going across First Nations lands, whether it's going across private lands. Our work in the community starts even before an application for a pipeline is made, and our work never stops until we've overseen the decommissioning and the eventual abandonment of the line. So some people don't realize that we're there before the ideas are even generated, and we're there right till the very end of the life cycle of the project. We're not just the people that show up to conduct a public hearing and assess the merits of the project. And that's really important that people understand that we have this life cycle role. As I mentioned a little bit about the competency of our staff, I think it's fair to say that many of our staff at the NEB would be amongst some of the most knowledgeable people regarding the pipeline and the regulatory business in Canada today. They work at the NEB because they have a passion for public service and a commitment to fairness, a commitment to taking responsibility, and a commitment to doing the right thing. They also have the dedication and the capacity to deliver. We carry out, we do many things year in and year out, and we conduct inspections, audits, emergency exercises right across this country all the time. And so my overriding message is that every day those 450 people show up at work to do whatever they can to improve our diligence and our oversight and and strengthen all of the aspects related to safety and security of this infrastructure that we regulate. And regardless of what our decisions might be on pending applications in front of us, it's important for communities and landowners to know that we're there for the infrastructure that's already in the ground across this country. And we share the interests of the communities and the landowners regarding the safety of that infrastructure. So why do we find ourselves in the eye of the storm, and what are we doing about it? So first, I think it's obvious to many of us that energy and environmental issues are more interconnected than ever before. And the issue of climate change and the debate around the forms of energy that power our economy are very global and systemic issues that people are very, very passionate about. And in that context, one of the big questions being asked is, why doesn't the NEB take into account greenhouse gas emissions from the oil sands when it holds hearings for pipelines that propose to carry oil sands crude? And I need to be clear that we at the NEB are very passionate about energy issues. We monitor energy issues. We monitor energy trade issues. We monitor energy market issues. And we care about environmental issues. We also try to be on top of all the issues that are going on in the energy debate today. So when some people try to characterize us as not caring about climate change, that's just not accurate. At the same time, though, when we carry out our pipeline reviews, we do only examine the greenhouse gas emissions that emit directly from the construction and the operation of the pipeline. And I know that sometimes frustrates people because, as you would expect, the level of emissions that come from the particular project we look at are typically small. And part of that is just the reality of being a regulator and having a defined mandate from Parliament in this country that is a federation that separates jurisdiction and shares jurisdiction in some cases. So the NEB just does not have the authority to regulate the greenhouse gas emissions that occur when oil is being produced. And so if that oil is being produced from the oil sands in Alberta, that falls under Alberta's regulatory jurisdiction and rests with their provincial regulators, just as it would the emissions that would occur from your offshore industry that falls under your regulatory jurisdiction, and the Canada Newfoundland Offshore Board would look at all the environmental issues associated with the production of your offshore oil and gas. We also don't have the authority to regulate the emissions that occur when the oil that's transported in the pipe eventually gets to its end location and is burned to power, a manufacturing plant, or is refined into fuels and then burned in the cars that we drive every day. The authority for setting standards and regulating those emissions from those activities also rests with other regulators and other governments. So one of the things that is, notwithstanding the demand for people regarding what should be debated during our reviews and our processes, we very clearly have a mandate to do, and we need to do our job, and we need to do it well. And I think we take that very seriously, doing our job well and addressing all of the issues that are directly relevant to our project. But it's not our role to expand our mandate or to explore into other areas, particularly when that jurisdiction rests with other governments. A lot of people today, because of our role in regulating pipes and the pipe's role in the center of this debate, are now also actively questioning the independence of the NEB. Can people trust us? And in my short time of the board, some stakeholders have accused me of being either in the back pocket of industry or in the back pocket of government. Take your pick. I'm from Alberta. I work for government, so can't be good. So I want to deal with industry first. And One of the things that some people raise with us is our budget is cost recovered by a levy imposed on industry, the levy akin to a tax on the industry. And the perception that that has and carries in some quarters is that we might be obligated to rubber stamp every project that gets in front of us because they're paying into the General Revenue Fund for Canada to cover our budget appropriation from Parliament. And that's just not true. So I need to keep dispelling that myth. People need to think of the levy like the concept of polluter pays, or in other words, the folks that create the burden or the need for the oversight should pay the freight for it. Our board members and our staff are bound by strict codes of conduct, conflict of interest requirements, and I got to tell you, they're very thorough. I went through a pretty thorough screening myself by the Federal Conflict of Interest Commissioner, and all of those requirements were created to ensure that our members don't have any bias on the matters that come before us. I can assure you that we don't feel indebted or obligated to industry in any way. In fact, that levy goes into General Revenue Fund. It doesn't come into the management and the financial affairs of the National Energy Board. It comes separately to the Government of Canada, and then we seek an individual appropriation every year from Parliament. And it is, we have denied applications in the past that industry had put forward. Now, I admit that that hasn't happened very frequently, but it has happened. And I also know that we've had occasions where companies will withdraw an application if during our review we uncover significant issues. But more often, I think it's true that once an application has come in front of us, we have very high standards in our filing requirements right at the outset that a company has to meet before they apply. Then we do some pretty thorough testing of an application by our staff, and typically the company will incorporate changes that are needed as we work through that assessment process. And then even while that project is undergoing a very, very rigorous and science-based testing, and I would argue that the testing and the assessment that our projects go through are among the highest, if not the highest, standards for assessment of pipelines in the world. They not only, in the case of large projects, that testing then extends to directly affected parties and other parties that have standing in front of our board. That testing extends to members and participants in our process. And sometimes out of that review, the company makes further commitments to how they are going to proceed with their project. And if we approve a project and if we attach conditions to it at the end of the project, those conditions are often costing the company millions of dollars to implement. And frankly, are another reason that people should see us as being independent from industry. But the fact of the matter is that once we work through that entire process, and it's quite rigorous, we're very confident as an organization that if a project is approved at the end of the day, that it can be built and operated safely. And then we have the tools in our toolbox that if we see evidence that the people operating the pipeline aren't operating it safely, or if our conditions aren't being met, we can put a stop to the pipeline. We can issue a safety order, and we can reduce the flow in that pipeline. We can cause the pipeline to be shut down, and we can also issue a variety of other enforcement penalties. And we've done that before in our history too. In terms of independence from government, I mentioned that we report to Parliament, the elected representatives of Canadians. And the only way the federal government can tell us what to do is either through making changes to our act and bringing them in front of Parliament to change the mandate or the requirements under which we conduct our business, or they can make orders to us in the ways that are set out in our legislation. And that's so that if government does do that, and they have not done it in recent history, if they do it, it would be very transparent so that everybody would see it and understand it. So again, other governments, if they have a view on a project that we're regulating, and many provincial governments will have a view on our pending Energy East application, if they want to tell us something about a project, they need to apply to participate in a hearing just like everyone else and provide their evidence on the record in front of us so that everybody can see it and it's available on the public record and will be taken into account by our panels when they make a public interest decision. So this notion of us being influenced by industry and government, I just haven't seen it in my time at the board, and it's one of those things that I'm going to keep talking to people out, because there's this perception that I just don't believe reconciles with the reality that I experience. Another one of the issues we face is the notion of more public involvement and more public consultation into our projects and into energy issues generally right across the country. And I was taken by a column that was written by Jeff Simpson in the Globe and Mail a few months ago. And the heading to his column was entitled, "What Does It Mean to Be Consulted?" And he was writing about the Northern Gateway Pipeline hearings. He outlined the exhaustive multi-year process that the Joint Panel on Northern Gateway went through, all of the communities they visited, all of the days of the hearings that they held, all of the letters and the comments that they received. And at the end of his column, he wrote, and I quote, "We seem to have reached a point where even the most exhaustive examination by an apparently expert panel does not provide for enough consultation. If this kind of process does not cut it, has anyone got a better idea?" And as you can imagine, for us at the NEB, that's a pretty important question that Jeff Simpson posed. And in my short time on the board, I've been asking many people if they have a better idea on how we as the NEB can consult Canadians. And the conclusion that I've come to is that it doesn't necessarily involve the hearing process or the hearing room. And part of that is it's a very formal, quasi-judicial, rules-bound process when we're conducting a hearing. And sometimes those processes, I think it's an understatement to say that they're impersonal, and they're sometimes intimidating to the parties that appear. And I think it's also fair to say that because of our test for directly impacted and relevant parties, that it's also fair to say that many people that might have a view on energy issues and the energy debate generally and want to have their voice heard may not be considered directly affected and may not be given standing inside our hearing. So again, the conclusion I've come to is that the answer to that question is not necessarily about the hearings. In order for us at the board to more effectively serve the Canadian public, people really need to have confidence in who we are and what we do and believe in our ability to enforce our rules and regulations. And given where we find ourselves today in the debate and our role in energy development, we've come to the conclusion that there's no better time than now to tell our story and to listen to Canadians outside of our hearing process. And that's part of the reason we are now going right across the country to meet with communities, mayors and councils, stakeholders right across the country. We want to go out and meet with people on their terms in their communities, and that's part of the reason that we're here today. We want to talk to people about what we should do about pipeline safety and protecting the environment, and we're going to listen to whatever else they want to tell us. So far, I can tell you the Atlantic meetings that we've had over the last week or so have been great, and it's the first segment of our national outreach initiative right across the country. We've met with municipal councils and officials. We've met with fishermen's unions. We've met with woodlot owners. We've met with environmental groups. And we even met with a 90-year-old engineer in St. John who's corresponded with us significantly in the past and has always held strong views about how the NEB interacts with individual Canadians who are interested in energy development. And from my perspective, hopefully the outcome of all of these meetings and discussions will be the beginning of better and more deeper relationships between the NEB and municipalities and organizations across the country, and also hopefully improve trust and confidence in the NEB. So the last thing I want to touch on today is my meeting today with the Canada, Newfoundland and Labrador Offshore Petroleum Board. And that was a very, very important meeting for us because, as you all know, the Offshore Board is critical to the regulation of your province's offshore oil and gas industry. Like us, it operates at arm's length from both the federal and provincial governments. It's responsible for safety, environmental protection, and resource management. And unlike us, it also has some responsibilities around industrial benefits. Scott Tessier, the chair and CEO, and I have interacted on several occasions since I became chair, and we've been working on a memorandum of understanding with the Offshore Board that we signed this morning around how we can work more closely together to support our joint efforts around safety and safety oversight for this industry, and how we can leverage our best practices and our learnings around environmental protection and resource conservation. So even though we regulate different parts of the industry, there's a lot of similarities, particularly around assuring public safety and the work that industry needs to do and the regulatory oversight mechanisms that we need to put on top. The other reason that that's most important, at the beginning I spoke to about some of the incidents that the industry has had that has maybe heightened people's concerns around safety, either in the offshore or onshore with pipelines. We all know that we have had some catastrophic incidents in the past, and if we're complacent, the conditions will surface again for those things to occur, and we should never and can never take that for granted. So our work with the offshore boards is to ensure that we continually strive for zero incidents. Our work is to help leverage our expertise and our competency to raise our performance on safety oversight, and we're jointly working together with them on an initiative that we call safety culture. And I'm just going to take a couple minutes and wrap up, but I just want to quickly explain the initiative of safety culture that we're advancing together with the offshore boards. And safety culture is, it means that a company with a good safety culture would manage every aspect of their business that could affect safety in the environment, whether it's from hiring to the allocation of their budgets, to what they decide their business priorities should be, to their operating, their management systems for operating excellence. And when a company has a strong safety culture, everybody in that company, no matter what job they do, is empowered to make decisions on safety. And when they do, those decisions, those actions are not just supported, but they're rewarded by leaders. I've heard the word culture defined as the way things work around here. So if you think of culture that way, the NEB and the offshore boards expect that the companies that we regulate must ensure that the way things work around here is an obsessive focus on putting safety first in everything that they do. And I think that's even more important as we're in an environment with cost pressures that we face in the upstream segments of the industry today. We can't afford to take safety for granted. And concurrently, when we look in the mirror at ourselves at the NEB, we have to put an obsessive focus on improving our management systems for the regulatory oversight of safety. And that's, again, why we're working with your offshore board and the Nova Scotia offshore board. So we learn and leverage off each other's performance, and we lift our game so that we never take the role that we play in supporting safety for granted. So I'm going to close. I've gotten my signal. The view from the NEB's perch today is pretty unique. We have a lot of controversy and we have a lot of change that swirls around us. And to use that metaphor again of the eye of the storm, we have to remain calm when we're in the eye of the storm. And we need to be composed and absolutely committed to listening to Canadians and helping ensure that the industry that we regulate is safe and can be made even safer as we go forward. And you have our commitment at the NEB that we will do both. So thank you very much, and I look forward to some discussion.
Thank you very much, Peter, for giving us a glimpse of the wizard behind the curtain. And I'm sure there's be a lot of questions about how the NEB operates and also some of the issues that you're regulating at the moment. I was remiss earlier in saying that we do have people watching online. And John, do you want to list the people who are online there?
So far, I have comments from Anna Myers and Michael McClurg. So far, we have a couple of questions we can take from them.
Oh, why don't we start with that?
Okay. One, Anna had sent earlier that the session is about pipelines. There's two parts to it. Does the National Energy Board undertake a similar review for transmission lines? And as well, are pipelines safer than trains for the environment or for the public?
Okay. Our role is very similar for international transmission lines. Our legislation does allow that the government can assign an interprovincial transmission line, but it has to be assigned to us by the government, and that hasn't happened recently. So, but anything international we do regulate, and the same comprehensive review process would unfold for international power lines. I'm going to answer your question around safety, maybe in a little different way, and part of that is because, of course, the NEB doesn't regulate railways or do anything regarding the oversight of rail safety, and yet I think we're all aware that after some of the incidents that we've seen, there's action underway to improve those systems for safety as well through Transport Canada and other agencies. I would just say that the pipeline sector, when you step back and you look at the data, it's very, very rare to have a significant catastrophic incident. And notwithstanding that, that's part of the reason we're advancing this notion of safety culture, because even if it is rare, we don't ever want to let complacency slip in so that it does happen. And because when it happens, it has quite a significant impact. So our focus, the industry has a pretty good record of keeping product in the pipe, but as I say, we can never let our guard down. Companies can't let their guards down. We can't as the regulator, and the industry as a whole has got to be pushing themselves to do as much as they can do to advance their own safety culture. In 2013, just to give you a stat for oil pipelines in Canada, for the oil pipelines that we regulate in Canada, so not all of them, but on our regulated facilities, there was a total of about 300 barrels spilled across the entire infrastructure in Canada. So not bad, but not perfect, and we're continuing to strive for perfection.